Well, hello again. So, here we go once more. Alright, so once again, the little disclaimer sort of intro. Again, this YouTube series is just a recollection of my past D&D campaigns, so my players have something to remember their adventures. I hope they enjoy it. I take no credit for this campaign setting. I used the sourcebook Explorer's Guide to Wildmount for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, created by the company and show Critical Role. I curated the story using the sourcebook and my players' backstories for this particular campaign. This first campaign I am doing is my most recent and longest campaign. I will do the older campaigns after this, going all the way back to the first campaign. So, here we go. So, at the beginning of the second session, we're still just with one player character, which is Wick Donsinger, our warlock. If you are joining on this episode and you didn't see the previous one, just go back to the previous one, and there's Wick's sort of intro and his description. But essentially, Wick is traveling as a caravan guard with a trading caravan that is leaving a city known as Port Damali, heading to the town of Tussoa, following the river northward from the coast, from the southern coast of the continent known as Wildmount. And remember, this is all fictitious. It's just made up places from the source book. Doesn't matter. You don't really need to keep track of it. But I'm just explaining where they're traveling from. So, essentially, this is one day later, right? It's about midday-ish. And the caravan has set out, essentially. So, the caravan is on its way to Tussoa. It's going to take just like a couple days. But they are traveling, and this is whenever I start introducing the other player characters. So, probably starting off with the next player character would be Vexen Razor Rash. Now, he's a ranger, so he's got like leather armor and stuff, and dark clothes. He's green scaled, right? And he's got a tail. So he looks like a lizard man with a hood and ranger's leather armor. But he's though he clearly looks like a lizard individual, he's kind of trying to keep it under wraps, right? So green scales, looks like a lizard fella with a tail. From there, we have the next player character, and Vexen signed on also as a caravan guard. You're going to notice a reoccurring pattern of player characters in their occupation in this session. So Vexen has spent a lot of time as a caravan guard, so he's pretty familiar with it, and he's just sort of meandering around and speaking to the other traders that are moving with the caravan. Then we have the next caravan guard / player character, which is a party favorite, Nox's Kid. Peculiar name. There's a reason for it, but we'll get on to that later. Anyways, Nox's Kid is for all intents and purposes, he's a human. He's got shaggy brown hair, blue eyes, and he's got fair skin, but it's suntanned, right? Because he spends a lot of time working outside. He's a bit of a farmer. Aside from that, Nox's Kid's description is pretty unique. So he's wearing a leather duster, like a leather coat, He's got a blue denim shirt that is unbuttoned all the way down to his abs. Because he likes to keep the breeze going, and he wears a cowboy hat. But he's a ranger, so he still has a bow and arrow. And that is Knox's kid. And Knox's kid is, always perceptive. He is very in tune with nature, and he's moving with the trader caravan as another caravan guard, and he's keeping an eye out, but he's just kind of aloof, and he's kind of a scatterbrain. He likes to keep track of things, and he's just looking around and enjoying nature. So he's keeping an eye out on the birds and the insects and the breeze through the grass and everything. But yeah, and they're moving along a river too, so he's watching like the fish jump out and stuff. Very happy-go-lucky guy. And then we have, we'll go with Vorkeef. So Vorkeef is a bit of a unique sort of player character race. He is a satyr. So in true satyr fashion, he is goat from the waist down. So he's all just fur and hooves. And he wears scale mail. And he's got kind of like a bluish violet cloak. And he's got typical satyr horns. But he's not to be confused with a tiefling. He's a satyr. And he wears a porcelain mask to disguise his face. So that is kind of his extra little item that he has. Anyways, Vorkeef is not a caravan guard. He's actually transporting some cargo with the caravan. But aside from that, he is our party's cleric. So basically the healer / support class. But Vorkeef takes on a lot of different roles because clerics are really versatile. So we have Vorkeef. And then we have... so Vorkeef is basically just traveling in the wagon that he has his cargo in. And he's just kind of keeping an eye out. Really a suspect sort of individual. But there's a reason for it. So we have Vorkeef. And then we have the final player character. And final party member, actually, because these are kind of the 5 mainstay party members that stay throughout the entire campaign. We have a 6th player that typically jumps in, but these are the 5 main ones. And the 5th and final one is an individual known as Xander Swiftclaw. Now, Xander is very young looking. He looks like around like 19 or so. So he's like late teens, and he looks like a human, but he's got a real feral look to him. Kind of a lean and wild look. But he wears dark clothes, and he also has a hood like Vexen. Typical rogue, right? Dark clothes, dark armor, and yeah, he is also moving with the caravan as a caravan guard. And with that, he's just kind of eavesdropping and keeping an ear out, listening in where he can on little rumors here and there. But aside from that, those are the 4 additional party members, aside from Wick. So there we have them. Now, at this point, I have Knox's kid roll a perception check. And what he does is he ends up noticing that, so where they are, they're moving along a road that travels alongside a river that goes from Port Damali to Tussoa, or down from Tussoa to Port Damali. And there's a grassy field to the right, and then along that is the jungle tree line. So Nox's kid, through that perception check, notices what appears to be a orc comes stumbling out of the jungle tree line. Now, quick side note about orcs. In this source book, in this world, the world of Exandria, it's basically, there's orcs that are like traditional orcs, right? That are typical sort of fantasy orcs, right? And they serve the betrayer god known as Grumsh. If you don't, again, what it's called, this is all from that book, the source book. And so Grumsh is a betrayer god, so it means he's a bad god. And he is the creator of orcs. There are orcs that worship him and follow his teachings, and those are the typical sort of orcs a lot of people are familiar with. And then there's the orcs of Exandria that do not follow Grumsh, and those are like normal, they're like normal NPCs. They're not bad or anything like that. They don't war and maraud and all that. So this guy, from the looks of him, he looks like a normal orc, not a Grumsh orc, bad orc. So he's coming out, and his clothes are all tattered. He looks like some sort of homesteader out there, and he's wounded, and he's bleeding. And he cries out, he's like, "Help! Help! I am in need of assistance." And so Nox's kid points him out. He's like, "Hey, who's that?" And he points him out. Nox's kid has kind of like a high-pitched, he has a higher-toned southern accent, so we love Nox's kid and his voice. But so he points him out, and Barrow Stone Turner, the dwarf leader of the caravan, brings the caravan to a halt, and the orc comes in, and Barrow basically calls in all of his caravan guards to kind of like prepare for if something's following the orc, or if the orc is like an ambush or something. But anyways, the orc gets to them, and he explains the situation, right? So the orc's family and he were attacked at their homestead that is about like 20 minutes or so into the jungle. And from what he describes, they were a group of kobolds. Again, kobolds are creatures that are very similar to goblins, but they're tiny, like little dragon goblins, all right? And they're actually not as intelligent, I think, as goblins, but yeah, they're a very small enemy, but they're dangerous in a group, so it makes sense that they would be able to overpower just one orc. Orcs are not that powerful anyways. They're not a difficult enemy to beat. So, essentially, we have the orc explaining what happened. The kobold showed up, they attacked him and his family, and they kidnapped his wife and child, and he barely escaped with his life. He still has a few arrows in him. So essentially, what brings Vorkeef into the mix, because he's not a caravan guard, he just comes over and he starts providing like a medicine check to try and stop his bleeding and stuff like that. So essentially, Barrow Stone Turner, obviously there's innocence at stake here. There's a woman and their child, and a family that needs to be reunited. And so the party is obviously like, yes, an obvious plot hook. Yes, we'll come together and rescue the imaginary mother and child. And so they're like, all right, we'll do it. So essentially, the party is given kind of like the lowdown from Barrow. Barrow says to say, all right, we'll wait here for one night, and we'll be leaving in the morning. If you guys are not back by tomorrow morning, we're going to carry on and leave. But the party's like, all right, well, Wick is obviously going because he is a vassal. This is what he's called to do. Vexen and Nox's kid are both rangers, so they would have the best chance of tracking the kobolds. And then Vorkeef, as a healer, as a cleric, he's like, yeah, I got expertise in that. I'll go with. And then Xander's like, well, obviously I'm a caravan guard. I'll go with too. So that's the party is finally formed. And from there, they journey into the jungle. So as they're journeying into the jungle, just like the orc says, about 20 minutes in, they find the homestead. They follow his blood trail, and they find the homestead, and it looks pretty thrashed. It looks like it's been thrown around and broken into. And so at that point, the party starts going into like investigation mode. So you have Vexen and Nox's kid that are both giving each other advantage, trying to track down a trail using perception and survival checks, nature checks. And then you got Vorkeef and Xander utilizing investigative and medicine checks, and they discover essentially that there appears to be only one set area of blood, right? Which means, all right, so this is obviously the orc that got attacked, and they follow the trail that leads back to where they came from. They're like, all right, so the mother and child are not harmed, but they have been taken. So from there, they are finally, Vexen and Nox's kid, they pick up the trail. And so they're like, all right, we got to get going. And from there, they begin to journey deeper into the jungle. And that is where they finally, it's another like 30 minutes or so that they get very far into the jungle, and they finally come to what appears to be kind of like the edge of a mountain slope, or the beginning of a mountain slope, and that is where they find the cave entrance. So the cave entrance, obviously they're like, this must be the place, because they got little sticks with various animal and beast skulls, and then they also have a couple of kobold skulls for whatever reason, and they're like, well, obviously this is where the kobolds are. I don't know why they're putting up skulls of their own kind. But anyways, the party dismisses that, and it's just like, kobolds are idiots. All right, so let's pick back up where we left off. I'm sure, there we go, that's a little bit better. So, let's see here, according to my notes. All right. So again, they just discovered the cave that the kobolds reside in. So, what we have here is they decide, all right, so how are we going to enter this cave? We're going to be careful and cautious, of course, because we don't know how many kobolds are in there, which is a probably smart thing. But with that, the party, they send in Xander first, right? Xander's a rogue. He does, he checks for traps. Common thing for all rogues to do. So he goes in. What he finds is, of course, there is a tripwire that leads to a sound alarm, right? It's just bones and like pieces of metal on like wind chime sort of things that will rattle together. So they know that. They're like, all right, so let's step over that. And they're doing this all in the dark too, because if they just come walking in with torches and stuff like that, it's going to be pretty obvious that for any lookouts, they're coming. So what they do is this. They sneak in, and they go about as far as they can go until what they come to is what appears to be a very giant sort of like cavern area, right? That has a waterfall that is flowing through it, right? Down into like a pool below. So it probably feeds the river. Who knows? Doesn't matter. Point is, what they see on the other side of this large cavernous room with the waterfall is there is torchlight on the other end, and there are two obvious kobolds that are standing guard with like spears and stuff like that. So they got the kobolds, all right? They're like, all right, this is the place for sure. And there appears to be some sort of rickety makeshift bridge that leads across over one of the walls, right? So there's two walls. There's the wall with the waterfall, And then there's the wall with this bridge, right? And on the other end, the kobolds are lying in wait for anyone to come across, right? And probably listening for the sound alarm. So the party starts thinking, is like, all right, what are we going to do? How are we going to do this? So the party comes up with a pretty clever plan. They send in Xander again, right? To once again check for traps. What he discovers in checking for traps, he discovers the makeshift bridge is pretty rickety, right? So makeshift rickety bridge. He's like, all right, well, fine. This will actually be an excellent trap for kobolds. So meanwhile, Vexen and Nox's kid both have their bows just ready to go and trained on the two kobolds. But Xander is over in the dark, right? The only light that is near the kobolds, it only goes out so far. So Xander is in the dark working on this, what is it called? This makeshift bridge, right? So he's underneath it, climbing around, using some climbing stuff, and he is essentially taking out wooden supports that are underneath the center section of the bridge. And through some quick thinking, what they decide to do is they're going to weaken the supports of this section of the bridge, and then he is going to tie a rope, and they all got 50-foot rope, and he's going to tie it to another 50-footer, and that should get him 100 feet back to the other side of the bridge. And what he's going to do is, essentially, they decided that they're going to use that sound alarm, right? They were thinking about using the sound alarm, but then they were like, let's just shoot the kobolds because they want to shoot, right? So there's a lot of back and forth with that, but eventually the party's like, all right, listen, let's let the guy shoot the kobold. So this time, Vexen and Nox's kid both train their arrows on the same kobold. They both fire simultaneously. And essentially what ends up happening is the party successfully tags this one kobold, takes him out, and then the other kobold's like, oh, snap. Obviously they're under attack. He sounds the alarm, and so the kobolds come running, right? And in perfect fashion, the party is all standing by, holding on to the rope. And they use a group strength check to pull the remaining support out, right? So finally, as the kobolds get across to that section of the bridge that they know is weakened, what is called, they go ahead and pull all together, and they rip out that final support, sending the small group of kobolds that are coming out to meet them down into the pool to their demise. So they succeed on that. But now they have this section of the bridge that they just took out, so they're feeling kind of silly about it. But in D&D, for whatever reason, it depends on your strength. Apparently, even really weak people can still jump pretty far. So they all pretty easily, they say, yeah, we took out this section of the bridge, yeah, we all jumped across. And for the one character that wasn't too strong, they were able to tie a rope for him just in case he fell, which he didn't fall, but it was still there. So I was like, all right, you guys, great job. But now they are on the other side of the bridge, right? And so they start clearing out the kobold caverns. And they find pretty obviously that there is kind of like the armory where the kobolds have all their weapons getting ready to go out to like maraud and raid and do all sorts of stuff. And then they have, as they get further in, they enter what appears to be kind of like a central cavern room, right? Now this cavern room is a little bit larger than the rest. They can tell because their torchlight only goes so far. They can't even see the other walls. So they're like, okay, this is a big room. And as they go deeper in, they discover there's a multitude of bones, right? This is the bones of animals, humanoids, kobolds, of course, and just bones upon bones upon bones. And what they find in the center is there is a dragon statue, right? So this dragon statue, now Vexen is he's pretty keen on dragons. He knows a lot about dragons. So looking at this dragon statue, he's like, I know what kind of dragon that is. That's a blue dragon, a chromatic dragon, an evil dragon. So looking at that, he already can tell. He's like, all right, these guys ain't good one bit, and they're worshiping what would be considered an evil dragon. So from there, Knox's kid, though, has a pretty good passive perception. And so what he's able to do is, I'm trying to sneak up on them with a particular monster. And Knox's kid notices it, obviously, because he has a great passive perception. So essentially, Knox's kid notices that there's something crawling through the bones behind the statue towards them. And so Knox's kid's like, hey, what's that? And he points it out. And then Vexen, being always quick to act, he takes the torch that's in his hand and he chunks it in that direction, right? And essentially the firelight from the torch, it startles the creature, right? So it emerges, it erupts from the bones that it was slithering through, and it's actually a giant constrictor snake. And so it's a giant creature. So the party's all working in unison. This is actually the first fight for the party as a whole. So, you got Vexen and Nox's kid that are just pelting it with arrows. Wick is doing what he does, Eldritch Blast, because he's a warlock. And then you got the cleric, which happens to be Vorkiv, being the unlikely tank. So he's up front, just taking all the hits and everything. And then you have Xander trying to get advantage any way he can as the rogue. And so he's trying to sneak up on it and attack it from behind. Now, for the most part, or he's flanking it essentially. But the reality of D&D is the party is typically going to overwhelm a single creature, even a large creature or a powerful one. It's just typical, right? But it's the first combat encounter. So they end up overwhelming the giant constrictor snake. They take it down. And at this point, they're like, all right, we can handle this. We know what we're doing. We know our jobs. And so from there, they are going into doing another, after they clear that out, right? After they clear out the giant constrictor snake in this sort of den for it, where there's all these bones and this blue dragon statue, they're like, all right, we need to go deeper. But there's a lot of pathways to go, so the party decides to make a very fateful decision that every party has to make every now and again, but it split the party, which is never really a good idea, but they do it anyways because they don't really see any other way of covering more ground quickly. The mother and the child might need their help, so they got to be quick. So essentially, what ends up happening is Xander and Nox's kid go one way. Then for Keith, Vexen, and Wick go the other. So at this point, they're traveling through this cavern system, and now they're kind of in the encampment where the kobolds actually live and camp and cook and all that stuff. And as they get further and further, both groups start noticing that the stone cavern-like walls start to give way to etchings and actual architecture. And so they are realizing that they are basically coming into what appears to be an ancient shrine. And they can hear chanting further and further inside. And what they discover is there is an ancient dragon shrine to a blue dragon. And there are two robed, lizard-looking individuals. And they have a congregation of kobolds that are all bowing down and praying and stuff to to this statue, this ginormous blue dragon statue that is etched into the wall. And the two robed lizard folk shamans, they are kind of leading this worship. And eventually they're saying something in Draconic because the kobolds and the lizard folk are communicating in Draconic. And so out comes the kobolds with the human mother and the half-orc child. So they're bringing them out to be sacrificed, essentially. Okay, so new day, new hat. But yeah, so we're picking back up. So essentially, lizard folk shamans are commanding the kobolds to bring the mother and child out, right? Human mother, half orc child. We're playing 5th edition, all right? So we still have half orcs. That's a reference for people that play the current edition, 2024. But yeah, so we have that. They're speaking Draconic, which is, a language in D&D. And it's the language of the dragons and whoever knows how to speak it. But so from there, we have the party, right? Now they're split up right now into 2 separate groups. So we have Vorkeef and Vexen and Wick that are down below, right? And they're sneaking up onto the kobold group from behind, right? They can see the shamans up on like the shrine, like pedestal area ahead with the hostages. But also, Xander and Noctis Kid are coming in from a different sort of route. Remember, they split up. So Nox's Kid and Xander are sneaking up a different tunnel that actually brings them sort of to like a balcony area where they can see down onto the kobolds, and they have basically the high ground to where they can see the shamans down below with the hostages. So the party's like, okay. Now they have no means of communicating with each other. They don't even know where Vexen, Vorkeef, and Wick are. But they see the lookout, who's the kobold lookout, who's watching over everything. So Xander, as a rogue, sneaks up on him, sneak attack, takes him out, 1 shot. And so now they have kind of the lay of the land. But the guys down below don't know that the guys upstairs are in position. But at this point, there's no table talk. They can't just communicate. So they're like, listen, they're about to sacrifice this mother and child. We got to do something. So Vexen, as always, is the first to act. He's quick. He's quick to it. He doesn't even think about it. So he's just like, all right, screw this. He starts firing arrows at the shamans, trying to hit likely the most dangerous targets first. And with that, Wick and Vorkeef, they back their boy. They just jump right into it. And so basically it turns into Vorkeef and Vexen are kind of the front line for Wick, and Wick is just firing Eldritch Blasts the whole time. And then Nox's Kid is obviously, he's got the high ground, so he's got advantage. He's just pelting arrows down there at him, just hitting anyone that he can. And so Xander does a cool acrobatic sort of move, right? Basically, he does kind of like a plunging attack from Dark Souls. He just jumps down on top of one of the kobolds, uses him as a cushion, while also running him through with his dagger. And from there, the battle is in full swing, right? So you got Vexen and Vorkeef and Xander just in the thick of it, just fighting through the kobolds. The lizard folk shamans, they're firing fire bolts and any spells that they got, like poison clouds and stuff, trying to take out our party. But they got Nox's Kid up top, who's just raining down arrows, and he's got advantage, so he's hitting pretty much every one of his hits, or every one of his attacks. And so essentially it turns into the lizard folk shamans. One of them turns into like a giant crocodile, and it's just a wild fight. It's a fun, wild fight where they're taking on multiple small enemies and then multiple stronger enemies. And it's a good second combat encounter for the party. And actually in this encounter, Xander and Vorkeef, they both go down. And they are both knocked unconscious. And they're doing like death saves and stuff like that. But of course, the party, it's not too difficult of an encounter. They overcome their foes, and the rest of the party picks up both Xander and Vorkeef, and they're good to go. And then what ensues is one of the favorite parts for every D&D party, and that is to loot the main boss area, right? So they just go in there and they're just looting kind of like the finer jewels, and they get some uncommon items, some uncommon magical items for their party to kind of disperse amongst themselves. I don't really remember what they got. Those are minor details. But essentially, yeah. So they get their reward, right, from looting the shrine, the ancient dragon shrine. And then they rescue, of course, the mother and the child. And I take it easy on them. I'm like, you guys don't need to figure out how to get out of there. We'll just say, fast forward, you guys are out of there. And so from there, the party recovers, and they get all the way back hours later to the caravan. By now, it's evening, right? Not too much time had passed, but by then they're out of there. And so, essentially, what happens is, there's a great welcome, a hero's welcome to the caravan for the party. What's called. A lot of the caravan goers didn't really think they'd make it. It seemed like a pretty daunting task. And of course, returning the family to the orc, he's overjoyed, he's pleased, he's very happy to see his wife and child. And they stay with the caravan for that night and everything. And there's minor celebrations. No. But essentially, that transpires. And in this time, the party's getting to know one another, right? So, they're kind of questioning each other, They're asking each other about each other's past and stuff. They find out Noctis Kid's a farmer, or was a farmer, and then he left his little farm in town to go out and seek adventure. And then you got Vexen, who's apparently been traveling with caravans for the majority of his life, but he traveled in a distant land known as Jorhas. So he traveled in a caravan all the way over there on the other side of the continent. We'll get on that later, but yeah, Vexen is also a little wary of dragons. He doesn't like them. And from there, they discover they don't get too much out of Xander. They just know that he's traveling as a guard. He's playing it pretty close to his chest, so he's not giving away too much about himself. But they suspect it. They suspect there's something more about him. Vorkeef explains that he's actually a bounty hunter, or at least his background is. He's an urban bounty hunter, so he's basically he's transporting a criminal that he got in Port Damali to Tussoa. He's bringing him back. So that's what he's doing. And then we have Wick, who is the most, I wouldn't say plain, but he's the most obvious guy. He's doing it because that's what his order of mages do. The vassals, they go out and they adventure. So the party just gets to know each other, and they kind of make the in-game pact that, like, we're a pretty good team, so maybe we should stick together. And so from there, that is where the initial party finally comes together. And that is where the second session finally ends. So from there, we'll pick up to where the party is going next, which is further northward to the town of Tussoa along the river. And yeah, that'll be the next one. But until then.